Imagine discovering that one of the worst wildfires in recent history wasn't just a natural disaster, but part of a dark, hidden plan. Barron Trump uncovered shocking secrets behind the flames, and his journey will inspire and amaze you. The early spring of 2025 brought anything but renewal to Austin, Texas, and its surrounding hill country. Instead of wildflowers, flames scorched the land. What had begun as a few isolated blazes quickly exploded into a full-blown catastrophe. Wildfires, fanned by relentless winds, tore through neighborhoods, forests, and ranches, leaving behind a wasteland of ash and ruin. The once blue skies over Austin were now swallowed in a thick, suffocating smoke that turned the sun into an eerie red disk hanging low on the horizon. The air was heavy with the acrid scent of burning wood and melted metal, making it hard to breathe. Helicopters thundered overhead, dropping water over flames that refused to die, while fire trucks raced through streets lined with soot-covered homes. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble within hours. Multi-million-dollar estates in the outskirts, humble ranches in the country, and bustling suburban streets alike. Officials blamed drought conditions and unusually high winds, attributing the rapid spread to unprecedented natural factors. Meanwhile, Barron Trump had traveled to Austin with his family for a formal event hosted by prominent Texas donors. What was meant to be a routine trip quickly became a front-row seat to disaster. From the high-rise suite where his family was staying, Barron gazed out over the smoke-choked cityscape, his sharp mind already noticing what others didn't see. There was something off about the way the fires had spread. Too calculated, too targeted. As emergency sirens wailed in the distance, and orange embers floated like fireflies across the skyline, Barron felt a nagging suspicion growing. This wasn't just nature lashing out. Something far more sinister, he feared, was unfolding, and he was determined to uncover it. From the moment Barron Trump arrived in Austin, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As he watched live coverage of the fires on his tablet and compared them to aerial images on social media, a pattern began to emerge that most people overlooked. The fires weren't spreading randomly, as wildfires typically do when fueled by wind and dry brush. Instead, they seemed to ignite in a linear sequence, as though someone had traced a deliberate path through neighborhoods, open fields, and commercial zones. Sitting at the hotel desk late into the night, Barron pulled up digital maps of Austin and its surrounding areas, cross-referencing them with the news reports that identified ignition points. He used satellite imagery, public fire department data, and even amateur drone footage shared by locals. With each location he marked, the alignment grew clearer. Fires erupting in suspiciously strategic locations, many of which were oddly connected to recent real estate transactions. Barron's analytical mind raced. Why these spots? Why now? He wondered. Most of the fires had originated near undeveloped lands or struggling neighborhoods, areas ripe for redevelopment. The fact that some of the properties affected had been bought up quietly by anonymous corporations just months before the fires began only deepened his suspicion. Driven by curiosity, Barron reached out to local officials and firefighters under the guise of a concerned student researching environmental disasters, but their responses were dismissive. They were overwhelmed and uninterested in conspiracy theories from a young man, even if his last name was Trump. Yet instead of being discouraged, Barron's determination only grew stronger. If no one else was going to ask the hard questions, he knew he had to do it himself, even if that meant facing uncomfortable truths. Determined to get to the bottom of what was happening, Barron Trump took his investigation to the next level. Armed with a notebook, a burner phone to avoid digital tracking, and a growing collection of suspicious data, he began visiting the sites of several ignition points that had already been extinguished by firefighters. What he found disturbed him: charred neighborhoods, blackened fields, and oddly intact patches of untouched land, as though the fires had been manipulated to avoid certain areas. Even more unsettling were the signs of precision: scorched marks that seemed too localized, too intentional to be natural. Barron began discreetly speaking with displaced residents, posing as a student writing a research paper. From elderly homeowners to young families, Many recounted similar stories: strange drones flying low in the days before the fires, loud metallic bangs that no one could explain, and utility trucks that didn't seem to belong to any city service. More than a few mentioned having been approached by real estate agents in the months prior, offering to buy their properties for suspiciously low amounts. One woman from a small suburban neighborhood told Barron, "They wanted my home. I said no. Then the fire came." Her words haunted him. But as Barron pressed further, the pushback began almost immediately. When he tried to access public records of land ownership and fire reports, officials seemed unusually guarded, refusing to release basic data under vague claims of security concerns. In one tense encounter at a city office, a clerk even warned him to drop it and go home. At first, Barron thought it was incompetence or red tape, but when a black SUV began appearing near his hotel and trailing him on his drives to fire sites, he realized something darker was at play. The more he uncovered, the more resistance he faced, as though invisible forces were working overtime to suppress the truth. But if their goal was to intimidate him into stopping, it was too late. Barron was fully committed to exposing what he believed was a calculated scheme, no matter the risk. With the danger mounting and his suspicions deepening, Barron Trump pushed forward, determined to gather first-hand accounts that might confirm his growing theory. He began visiting evacuation centers and burned-out neighborhoods, carefully approaching residents who had lost everything to the flames. What he heard stunned him. In an evacuation center outside Thousand Oaks, an elderly man named Jack, who had lived in the hills for over 40 years, described how in the days leading up to the fires, he had seen drones flying low over the canyon at night, their blinking red lights barely visible against the dark sky. They were too quiet to be helicopters, Jack insisted, his voice tinged with anger. I knew something wasn't right. In another shelter in Agora Hills, a woman named Elena shared a chilling account. Her ranch had been reduced to ash, but she had captured photos of strange patterns in the burn areas. Perfect circles of scorched earth, surrounded by untouched ground. It's like the fire was aimed, she whispered, sliding her phone across the table for Barron to see. One photo showed a small dark object hovering above her property just minutes before the fire started. A drone, equipped with what appeared to be a small canister. As Barron gathered these accounts, a pattern began to emerge. Multiple residents spoke of unmarked utility trucks driving slowly through their neighborhoods just days before the fires, men inside surveying properties that later burned to the ground. And most disturbing of all, several people mentioned having been approached months earlier by a company called Solvista Holdings, offering to buy their homes for far below market value. We told them no, Jack said bitterly, and now there's nothing left to sell. For Barron, the evidence was no longer circumstantial. It was a mosaic of terror and manipulation. The fires weren't just natural disasters, they were part of something calculated and devastating. And now, he had enough to know he was chasing a very real and very dangerous truth. After hearing multiple residents mention Bright Star Development, a name that seemed to pop up alongside suspicious land purchases, Barron Trump knew where to focus his next efforts. Returning to his hotel room, he began a deep dive into the company's background, using public records, corporate filings, and news archives to piece together the puzzle. What he uncovered sent a chill down his spine. Bright Star was a real estate and development conglomerate, publicly focused on rebuilding sustainable communities in disaster-prone areas. But beneath that polished image, its corporate structure was a maze of shell companies, making ownership and transactions nearly impossible to trace. At the center of this shadowy empire was Evelyn Grayson, Bright Star's CEO, a sharp, ruthless figure with a history of controversial developments. Grayson, in her mid-50s, had quietly amassed a real estate empire, specializing in buying up distressed or disaster-affected land, often for pennies on the dollar, and turning them into luxury properties for enormous profits. A deeply buried investigative article from years earlier detailed her involvement in a scandal where entire communities were displaced for a redevelopment project that collapsed, leaving hundreds homeless and without compensation. As Barron scrolled through financial records, one fact stood out like a red flag. In the months before the wildfires, Brightstar had purchased dozens of properties in high-risk fire zones, at inflated prices far above market value. Why would anyone pay so much for land in areas doomed to burn? Unless, of course, they knew the fires were coming. Even more alarming, Barron uncovered emails leaked in a previous lawsuit, where Grayson's team discussed accelerating project timelines if conditions permitted, vague language that now took on a sinister meaning. Realizing he was uncovering a powerful figure's darkest secrets, Barron's sense of urgency doubled. Evelyn Grayson wasn't just an opportunistic developer. She could be the mastermind behind the fires themselves. If he was right, exposing her could stop further destruction, but it would also put him in the crosshairs of someone who would do anything to protect her empire. Feeling overwhelmed by the dangerous information he had uncovered, Barron Trump realized he couldn't do this alone. He needed help from someone with both the experience and the platform to investigate and expose powerful players like Evelyn Grayson. After some research, he identified Maria Gonzalez, an award-winning investigative journalist known for her fearless work exposing corporate corruption and political scandals. Maria had built a reputation for taking down high-profile figures, and though she had earned many enemies, her work was always solid and respected. Barron reached out through encrypted email, cautiously summarizing what he had discovered about Brightstar development, the suspicious land purchases, and the fire patterns. To his surprise, Maria responded within an hour, agreeing to meet him at a quiet cafe in downtown Los Angeles. When Barron arrived, Maria was already seated, a leather-bound notebook open, her sharp eyes watching the entrance. She greeted him with a firm handshake, instantly commanding respect. As Barron recounted the story, from his first suspicions to uncovering Evelyn Grayson's name, Maria listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes, but mostly watching him with a keen, analytical gaze. When he mentioned Brightstar's real estate acquisitions and the possibility of drones being used to start fires, Maria's expression darkened, and she leaned forward. "You're on to something, Barron," she said, her voice low but urgent. "I've been following rumors about Grayson for years, nothing concrete, until now." She admitted that there had been whispers of Grayson's role in previous disasters, but nothing that could stick. What Barron brought to the table, maps of ignition points, evidence of land grabs, and a growing number of eyewitness accounts, was the missing link she needed. Maria agreed to help, but she warned Barron, "If Grayson's behind this, she's dangerous. We have to move carefully." She proposed working together, combining her media contacts and investigative skills with Barron's fresh leads. For the first time since the fires began, Barron felt a spark of hope, an ally who could help him bring the truth to light. But Maria also left him with a chilling reminder. Once we start, there's no going back. As Barron Trump and Maria Gonzalez began digging deeper into Brightstar Development's hidden dealings, the atmosphere around them grew increasingly tense. What started as subtle signs quickly escalated into clear threats. Barron first noticed a black SUV with tinted windows following him from his hotel to a coffee shop, then, later parked near his family's temporary residence in Los Angeles. At first he tried to convince himself it was coincidence, but when he saw the same vehicle waiting outside the library where he had been researching corporate records, he knew it wasn't random. Maria, too, reported unsettling experiences, receiving anonymous phone calls that hung up as soon as she answered, and finding her apartment door slightly ajar when she returned one night, though nothing seemed stolen. Their nerves were further tested when Maria's trusted source inside City Hall, a clerk who had secretly passed her information on Brightstar's fast-tracked building permits, went dark without explanation. Attempts to call or email him were met with silence. It was as if he had vanished overnight. Then came the final straw. A manila envelope slid under Maria's door, containing only a single typed note. "Stop digging, or you'll both get burned." The message was clear and terrifying. Maria immediately showed Barron, both realizing they were getting dangerously close to something big, something someone was willing to protect at all costs. Despite the fear, Barron's determination hardened. "If they're trying to scare us off, we must be right on target," he told Maria, though deep down, he knew the danger was real. As they reviewed the evidence they had gathered so far, Barron realized that exposing the truth wouldn't just take courage, it would require outsmarting people willing to destroy everything to keep their secrets hidden. Just as Barron Trump and Maria Gonzalez feared their investigation might stall under mounting threats, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source, an anonymous whistleblower claiming to be an insider at Bright Star Development. The message, received through an encrypted email, included a trove of documents and internal communications that would blow the case wide open. Among them were emails between Evelyn Grayson, Bright Star's CEO, and senior city officials, discussing plans to quietly acquire land in targeted neighborhoods devastated by the fires. What was shocking was the explicit language used. Phrases like clearing obstacles and accelerating burn zones. Clear indications that the fires were not only expected, but planned. One document was a schematic for modified drones, equipped with devices capable of igniting controlled fires. These drones were eerily similar to those locals had reported seeing in the days before the wildfires. Even more damning, detailed maps within the files showed targeted areas for future acquisition, perfectly matching the paths of the actual fires. Another thread of emails detailed bribes paid to officials for pushing through emergency redevelopment permits under the guise of rebuilding, while secretly transferring ownership of large land parcels to shell corporations connected to Bright Star. Barron and Maria were stunned. The fires weren't a natural disaster, they were a deliberate, calculated effort to destroy communities and force residents out, clearing the way for profit-driven development. For Barron, reading the words accelerating burn zones felt like a gut punch, proof that people had lost homes, and some even their lives, because of unchecked greed. Maria quickly backed up the files in multiple secure locations, knowing their mere possession of these documents could make them bigger targets. This moment was a turning point in their investigation. With hard evidence in hand, Barron and Maria realized they now had the power to expose one of the most shocking conspiracies in recent history. But they also knew this revelation would place them directly in the crosshairs of powerful enemies determined to keep the truth buried. Just as Barron Trump and Maria Gonzalez began planning how to release the damning evidence against Bright Star Development, the danger around them escalated to a terrifying level. One morning, Barron awoke to a barrage of missed calls and cryptic text messages from Maria, messages that abruptly stopped mid-sentence. Alarmed, he rushed to her apartment, only to find the door ajar and the inside completely ransacked. Her notes, files, and laptop were gone, as if someone had systematically wiped out every trace of her investigation. What chilled Barron to the bone was the ominous silence. No sign of Maria, no explanation, and no word of where she had gone. On her desk, a single note was left behind, reading only, "You've been warned." Barron's mind raced as he realized the full gravity of the situation. Maria had been taken or forced into hiding because of what they had uncovered. Fear clawed at him, but so did determination. He knew now that they were dangerously close to the truth, so much so that powerful forces were willing to do anything to silence them. Alone and unsure who he could trust, Barron knew he had to continue the fight, not only to bring justice to those affected by the fires, but also to protect Maria and ensure her work would not be erased. The stakes had never been higher, and there was no turning back. With Maria gone and the threat level higher than ever, Barron Trump knew he had no choice but to act swiftly. Armed with the leaked emails, drone footage, and a growing file of evidence against Bright Star Development and Evelyn Grayson, he devised a plan to bring the truth to light before it could be buried forever. Realizing he could no longer trust the usual channels, Barron reached out to a well-known international journalist with a reputation for taking on high-stakes corruption cases, someone beyond the reach of local intimidation. In a secret meeting, Barron handed over the entire cache of evidence, detailing how Bright Star orchestrated the fires to clear land for profitable development, with emails proving payouts to corrupt officials and plans to manipulate rebuilding. Simultaneously, Barron prepared a digital dossier of everything he had gathered, set to release online to trusted platforms if anything happened to him. He contacted his father, Donald Trump, giving him a glimpse of the situation and asking for behind-the-scenes protection, knowing that political connections could offer some shield, but only if the truth was already exposed. Working against the clock, Barron helped coordinate with the journalist to finalize a bombshell expose that would hit every major outlet simultaneously. The day the article went live, headlines across the nation screamed the truth. Wildfires for profit, Bright Star development, and the scandal behind LA's fires. The story quickly went viral, protests and official investigations. Barron, though still looking over his shoulder, felt a surge of relief as he watched the lies unravel and justice start to take root, knowing that even against massive odds, one voice, backed by truth, could make a difference. The fallout from the expose was immediate and massive, sending shockwaves across the country. News of Bright Star Development's deliberate role in orchestrating the wildfires dominated headlines for weeks, with images of scorched neighborhoods juxtaposed against the damning emails and drone footage Barron Trump had uncovered. Public outrage grew as people realized that what had been portrayed as a natural disaster was, in part, a man-made catastrophe fueled by greed. Evelyn Grayson, once a respected CEO, was now the face of corruption and destruction, forced to resign in disgrace as federal authorities launched full-scale investigations. Within days, protests erupted outside Bright Star's corporate offices, with crowds demanding justice for the displaced families. Lawmakers were quick to respond. Under immense public pressure, new legislation was introduced and passed swiftly, focusing on stricter controls over land acquisitions in fire-prone areas and banning corporate lobbying efforts related to emergency zoning. Additionally, a federal task force was established to investigate and regulate the use of drones in urban and rural areas, ensuring they could never again be weaponized for destruction. For Barron, seeing these reforms was bittersweet. The fires had devastated countless lives, but change was finally happening. His investigation had not only exposed a major scandal, but also sparked a broader conversation about accountability, environmental justice, and the unchecked power of corporations. Though the journey had been dangerous, Barron realized the truth had the power to shift an entire nation toward action. As the media frenzy began to settle and legal proceedings moved forward, Barron found himself reflecting on everything that had unfolded. What had started as a curious observation of wildfire patterns had evolved into a battle against one of the most powerful and corrupt corporations in the country. The journey had left him forever changed. The threats, the fear of being followed, the betrayal of trusted systems, all had opened Barron's eyes to the darker undercurrents of power and greed. Yet amid the chaos, he also witnessed incredible resilience from the communities impacted, and solidarity from those who chose to stand up and fight back. The letters he received from displaced families and fellow young activists encouraged him, reminding him that his actions had made a real difference. But beyond the public spotlight, Barron realized that this experience had given him a sense of purpose he never expected. No longer content to be seen simply as the president's son, he was determined to use his voice and resources to continue fighting for justice, whether that meant corporate accountability, environmental protection, or standing up for those silenced by power. He began outlining plans to launch a nonprofit focused on investigating environmental crimes, bringing together journalists, lawyers, and investigators to ensure that what happened in Los Angeles would never happen again. For Barron, this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one defined by action, integrity, and the pursuit of truth, no matter the cost. The story of the wildfires and the conspiracy behind them left a permanent mark on the nation, and on Barron Trump himself. What had begun as a natural disaster was now widely recognized as a man-made tragedy fueled by greed and corruption, thanks to Barron's relentless pursuit of the truth. Communities devastated by the fires began to rebuild, this time with stronger protections and oversight, as a result of the national reforms his investigation had triggered. Bright Star's fall served as a warning to corporations that exploitation and manipulation would no longer go unchecked. But beyond the legal victories, the most lasting impact was the inspiration Barron gave to everyday people, showing that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one determined voice can spark a movement for change. For Barron, it was a reminder that courage and truth are powerful enough to expose even the darkest secrets, and that sometimes heroes are born from unexpected places. The story of Barron Trump's investigation into the wildfires teaches us a powerful lesson about courage, persistence, and the importance of speaking truth to power. While many accepted the fires as natural disasters, Barron dared to question what others overlooked, uncovering a shocking web of corporate greed and corruption. His journey reminds us that even when you're young or underestimated, your voice and determination can make a difference. Despite threats, surveillance, and the disappearance of his ally Maria, Barron didn't give up on exposing the truth, proving that standing up for what's right is often difficult, but always necessary. The story also highlights how ordinary people can unite against injustice, as communities rallied to support reforms and hold corporations accountable. Ultimately, this story reminds us that one person's courage can spark real change, and that seeking justice, even when dangerous, is a fight worth pursuing, because in doing so we protect not only ourselves, but also the future for others.